This is Jessie Carty with Shape of a Box, and I'm here today with Scott Owens, a poet, educator, and editor, just to name a few of his roles. His most recent publications include a full-length poetry collection titled The Fractured World, which was released by Main Street Books in 2008. His most recent chapbook, Book of Days, has been released online by The Dead Mule. Scott also teaches at Catawba Valley Community College and is the poetry editor for Wild Juice Poetry Review. And he's currently working with the Sam Reagan Poetry Prize. I'll have more details in the sidebar. Thank you.
Well, I think the first thing that I try to do is to objectify the events, to take them outside, to look at myself and the other people involved in the events more as characters in a story than as people I care deeply about or people I don't care deeply about. And that, I think that helps to get down to the details. It also, the act of writing about it also helps me objectify these things that have happened, to make it something outside of myself, to make it a work of art, if you will, that I can manipulate, that I can examine from different angles, and in a sense the writing about it becomes very therapeutic. And of course, once you've objectified it, then that also frees you up to lie, to embellish the story so that it becomes a better work of art rather than feeling like you're married to it as. Oh yeah. Yeah, I have to constantly remind, especially my students, when we read a work of art, they immediately want to come to some conclusion. When we read a poem, they want to come to some conclusion about the poet based on the poem. And I have to remind them that, you know, most of us write about things we know, things we've experienced, things we've seen, but we're not limited to those things. We go beyond those things because at some point we become conscious of the fact that what we're creating is a work of art, and we want it to have as strong an impact on our readers as possible. And sometimes that means that you need to rearrange some things. In The Fractured World, for example, one of the main characters is named Norman, and Norman is my biological father's name. But the Norman in the book is in no way limited to the characteristics of Norman, my father. In addition to my biological father, I had several stepfathers who were much more physically brutal than Norman ever was. So I just combine all those characteristics into one figure. Norman becomes the father in a sense. Sure. Since I mentioned Norman, I'll read a poem that has Norman in it. This is Norman in the window, his eyes like shattered glass. Inside or out, you know what has just happened. The bowl has grown wings and flown into the wall. The table has lost 2 legs. The door has slammed shut. There is blood on my mother's face. There is blood waiting in Norman's hands. Norman is in the window. What I mean is, his hand is in the window. His common sense came back when he saw the jagged edge rising just below his wrist, and he left his hand where it was, uncertain whether to draw it back slowly or grit his teeth and dare the life he's living. All she wanted was to keep him here, and now it is she who is leaving, her children gathered beneath the apron of her arms. Norman is in the window. He can see from here the red shape of her leaving. He can hear her little sobs through what is broken open. He can see her arms fluttering like wings around the children. The welt on her face is already taking the shape of a hand in a window. Norman is in the window. He can tell by the pain in his hand that he is not dreaming. Even through these broken panes, he can see the last look back. Even through eyes blood-streaked and cracked, he can tell that what he's broken will never heal. Well, years and years ago, I've had 2 lives as a poet. Back in the mid-90s, I wrote a great deal, went on to pursue my MFA at UNC, published a collection from Sandstone Press, And then I kind of got into a situation where writing had to take a back seat to surviving, if you will. And so I stopped writing for a while. But I had been associate editor of Southern Poetry Review during that first life as a writer. So editing a journal is something that I've always been interested in. And when I started writing again and sending work out, I had poems published in consecutive issues of Wild Goose Poetry Review. And I guess because I was very close, Wild Goose is published out of Charlotte. Patricia Boston, the editor, needed some, they were starting to get so many email submissions that they needed some help. And she just wrote me a note real quick and asked if I'd be interested in helping. And I said, sure. So, and I've enjoyed it a great deal, not only because I get to edit a magazine, but I get to write reviews again. It's something I really enjoy doing because it keeps me reading. Not just the books that I automatically think, oh yeah, I'm going to like this. Of course I'm going to read those. But this way I read some books that I might otherwise overlook. Is important not only for developing your work, but for staying motivated. Poetry has so few extrinsic rewards that if you are not intrinsically motivated, then you're going to have to find some way to keep that push going. And one of those ways is to have a community of writers that you're working with. But Poetry Hickory, there's a writer at CVCC, Tim Peter, whom I have admired since the early 90s. And when I didn't know that he was still at CVCC. And that show, I mean, Hickory's a fairly small community. For a writer of his stature to be practically unknown as a writer in Hickory seemed a travesty to me. And it just seemed a natural idea to bring him exposure, as well as writers like Kevin Keck and Brad Vogler and Bud Kaywood and Anne Chandonnet. I became aware of all these other writers in the area who needed the local audience, if you will, to be aware that they were here. So I put the reading series together. We hold it right here in Tasteful Pete's Coffee House where we're doing this interview, the second Tuesday of each month at 6:30. And we started out featuring just local writers, and then it's kind of expanded. We've had writers come from Asheville and Charlotte and Chuck. I honestly don't know how that happened. Ed Cockrell, who's the president of the Poetry Council of North Carolina, sent me an email, and I'm passionate about poetry. I'm a poetry promoter, I guess you would say. And I think the best way to promote anything is to start with people who are young. I've taught creative writing in colleges for a while, so I always want to help my students find an audience and get published. And so it seemed like a natural fit for me to work with the Sam Reagan Prize, since it's aimed at high school students and undergraduates. One more, and this is not in the Fractured World. This is a poem that is related to the events of the Fractured World. And then in the last one I talked about how we objectify events and how we kind of fictionalize events. This is one that there's no fiction to this. This is a recent poem that is unfortunately very accurate. It's called Defending the Indefensible. My friend's mother calls to tell me he's in jail. She won't tell me why, though I guess the reason, and later confirm it with a police record search. Use of hands, feet, choking to unconsciousness. His father hit him often, without mercy. I think of the poem he read in class, his father bearing down, the belt across his back for his own good. I think of my own days locked in closets, bloodied beneath the belt, the hand on the electric stove. None of this is meant to excuse him, but if I can remember, he's still a boy on the wrong end of a short temper, of rage wrongly expressed. He might stand a chance of remembering himself.